She was merely a maid, but when she reorganized the forgotten library of that sprawling estate, she found something that no amount of money could buy. Can you imagine working in the home of a man so distant and cold that everyone claimed his heart was closed forever, yet feeling that his every glance held a secret only you could decipher? This story took place in the rural heart of Georgia in March of 1923, on a plantation so vast it took half a day to cross on horseback. If you are watching this video right now, leave a comment below telling me where you are tuning in from. Write down your city and state. I love knowing that these stories from days gone by reach so many different places across the US and the world. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that subscribe button now and click the bell icon so you don't miss any moving stories like this one. Let's get into it. Eleanor Vance was only 24 when life taught her that loneliness weighs heavier than any physical burden. She had lost her husband 6 months earlier, in September of 1922, when Thomas fell from a roof he was repairing in the village of Oakhaven. The accident was quick, said those who witnessed it. He didn't suffer, the neighbors repeated, as if that would soothe Eleanor's pain. But she knew the true suffering began afterward, when she woke up every morning and reached out to the empty side of the straw mattress. Thomas was a manual laborer, an honest man, but without means. They lived in a rented 2-room shack on the outskirts of town with weather-beaten clapboard walls and a roof that leaked when the summer storms rolled in. Eleanor took in sewing, baked pies to sell at the market on Sundays, and washed clothes for the wealthier families. Thomas worked wherever there was a job to be done, hauling sacks of grain, mending fences, helping with the harvest. Together, they managed to pay the rent and eat every day. It wasn't an easy life, but it was a shared life, and that was enough. When Thomas passed, the landlord gave Eleanor a month of grace. After that, she would have to pay or leave. She tried to keep up her work, but the sewing orders dwindled. People pitied her, but pity didn't fill a belly or pay the rent. In November, Eleanor sold the few pieces of furniture she owned. In December, she sold the sewing machine that had been a wedding gift from Thomas's godmother. By January of 1923, she was on the street. She slept for 3 nights at the home of Mrs. Higgins, an elderly woman who sold vegetables at the market and took pity on her. But Mrs. Higgins had 7 grandchildren living with her and little space. On the 4th morning, she served coffee with stale biscuits to Eleanor and said, with a heavy voice, that she couldn't do anything more. Eleanor thanked her with dignity, gathered the small bundle of her clothes, and left without looking back. She walked along the dirt road that led out of the village, with no certain destination, just following where her legs took her. The January sun was unforgiving. Her grey cotton dress clung to her sweaty back. Her old shoes pinched her feet. Eleanor thought of Thomas, how he always said she was strong, that she could endure anything. "You have the heart of a lioness, my Ellie," he used to say while caressing her face with calloused hands. She didn't feel strong now. She felt tired, defeated, invisible. She stopped under an old oak tree to rest. The shade was sparse, but better than nothing. She sat on the dry ground, leaning her back against the rough bark. She closed her eyes. Maybe she could sleep there. Maybe in the morning she would have more clarity on what to do. Or maybe she simply wouldn't wake up, and that would be a type of solution too. That was when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She opened her eyes. An old man was driving 2 thin horses pulling a cart loaded with firewood. He slowed his pace as he passed Eleanor, looking at her with curiosity mixed with caution. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked without stopping completely. Eleanor stood up quickly, dusting the dirt from her skirt. "Yes, I am, sir," she replied, her voice trying to sound steady. "Just resting a spell." The man nodded slowly. "Ain't no place for a young woman to be alone," he said. "There's plenty of bad folks on these roads. You take care." And he carried on, leaving Eleanor alone again with the sound of wheels creaking on the road. She walked for another 2 hours before reaching a crossroads where there was a small general store. She went in asking for a glass of water. The owner, a pot-bellied man in a dirty apron, served lukewarm water in a tin cup. Eleanor drank slowly, savoring every sip. "Thank you," she said. The man wiped the counter with a grimy rag. "Where are you from?" he wanted to know. "From Oakhaven," Eleanor replied. "What are you looking for around here?" "Work," she said plainly. "Any work." The man scratched his patchy beard. "I don't have anything to offer here. But I heard the Harrington estate is needing help up at the big house. It's that way." He pointed with his thumb to the west. "About 10 miles from here. You walking?" Eleanor nodded. "Then it'll take you till nightfall. Best hurry." The Harrington estate was a well-known name in the region. Everyone knew it belonged to the Harrington family, one of the wealthiest and most traditional in the state. Eleanor had never set foot there, but she had heard of the immense mansion, the cotton fields that stretched as far as the eye could see, the hundreds of workers living in the cabins scattered across the property. Working on an estate of that size was a privilege. The maids at the big house earned a fixed wage, had a roof and food guaranteed, sometimes even uniforms provided. It was exactly what Eleanor needed. She walked the 10 miles under the harsh sun. Her feet bled inside her shoes. Her throat burned with thirst. Her head throbbed. But Eleanor kept going, step after step, because giving up was not an option. When she finally spotted the wrought-iron gate of the estate, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in orange and pink. The gate was open. Eleanor passed through it with reverence, like someone entering sacred territory. The estate's driveway was lined with towering oak trees that formed a majestic corridor. To the left and right, perfectly aligned rows of cotton stretched in green waves to the distant hills. The mansion appeared at the end of the avenue of oaks, a massive colonial construction of 2 stories, painted white with blue trim. Wide verandas wrapped around the entire facade, tall windows with blue shutters open to the evening air. Well-tended gardens surrounded the building, with rose bushes, jasmine, and colorful hibiscus. It was of a beauty Eleanor had never imagined existed. She went around the mansion until she found the service entrance at the back. She knocked on the door timidly. A middle-aged woman, thin and with a severe expression, answered. She wore dark, clean clothes, her graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. "What do you want?" she asked without preamble. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I heard you are in need of a maid," she said. "I came to offer my services." The woman examined Eleanor from head to toe with a critical eye that missed no detail. She saw the wrinkled dress, the worn shoes, the sunburnt face, the pitiful bundle. "Where do you come from?" she questioned with suspicion. "From Oakhaven," Eleanor replied. "I walked." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Walked? That's nearly 10 miles." Eleanor said nothing, just held her gaze. The woman sighed. "I am Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. We really have been needing another maid since Josie left last month to care for her sick mother. But I need to know if you're fit for the service. Can you read?" Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope. "Yes, ma'am. I learned from the parson in my village when I was younger. I can write too and do sums." Mrs. Gable seemed surprised. "That's rare for folk of your standing," she commented. "Have you worked in a family home before?" "I worked in my own home," Eleanor replied. "I can cook, wash, iron, clean. I'm careful and I work hard. I'm not lazy and I learn fast." Mrs. Gable pondered in silence. Finally she nodded. "I'll give you a chance. The pay is $5 a month with room and board out back. You work Monday to Saturday. Sunday is yours. Start at 5 in the morning, finish when the work is done. Obey my orders without question. If you don't suit, you leave without complaint. Do you accept?" Eleanor felt tears threatening, but she held them back. "I accept, yes, ma'am," she said with a controlled voice. "Thank you for the opportunity." Mrs. Gable signaled for her to enter. "Come, I'll show you your room. You can get cleaned up and rest today. Tomorrow starts early." Eleanor followed the housekeeper through wide corridors, passing a huge kitchen with a gigantic wood-burning stove, a pantry full of provisions, and a service area with stone basins. Everything breathed order and abundance. The maids' quarters were in a separate annex in the back. It was small but clean, with 2 single beds, a simple wardrobe, and a small table with a basin for washing up. "You'll share with Beatrice," Mrs. Gable explained. "She's worked here for 3 years. She'll teach you what you need. Now rest. Tomorrow we wake at 4:30. When Mrs. Gable left, Eleanor sat on the bed and finally allowed the tears to fall. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were of relief, of gratitude, of hope reborn. She had work, she had a roof, she had food. She had a chance to start over. Thomas would be proud of her. She was going to make it. She was going to get back on her feet. She was going to prove she deserved this opportunity. That first night, Eleanor slept deeply for the first time in months. She woke up with Beatrice shaking her shoulder. "Get up, miss. It's 4:30, announced the other maid, a young woman with a friendly face. "Mrs. Gable doesn't like lateness." Eleanor jumped out of bed, washed her face in the basin, pinned up her hair, and put on the least worn dress she had. Beatrice smiled. "You'll get used to it," she said. "The work is hard, but the house is fair. We eat well, and the master isn't bad. He hardly appears, lives locked in his office or travelling." The two went down to the kitchen where Mrs. Gable was already organizing the day's tasks. "Eleanor, you'll start by helping with the house cleaning," the housekeeper determined. "Beatrice will show you what to do. I want everything spotless. The master returns from his trip this afternoon and tolerates no slovenliness." Eleanor nodded enthusiastically. "You can count on me, Mrs. Gable. I'll do everything properly." She spent the whole morning cleaning the parlour, the main hallway, the dining room. She dusted fine mahogany furniture that gleamed even before being cleaned. She polished heavy silverware. She scrubbed the wide plank floors with lye soap. She arranged velvet cushions on the sofas. Everything in that house exuded discreet but unmistakable wealth. The paintings on the walls were oil landscapes and portraits. The curtains were of thick, well-stitched fabric. Persian rugs covered the floor in explosions of colour. It was a world completely different from anything Eleanor had ever known. At noon, Mrs. Gable called the maids to eat lunch in the kitchen. The food was plentiful. Potatoes, beans, pot roast, stewed greens, cornbread. Eleanor ate slowly, savouring every forkful. Beatrice told stories about the estate while they ate. "The master is named Julian Harrington," she explained. "He's 32. He was widowed about 5 years ago, and since then became this closed-off man who barely speaks to anyone. He lives only for work. The estate has grown a lot under his command. He's a good administrator. But they say his heart died along with his wife. Society women are always chasing him, but he pays no mind to any of them." Eleanor listened in silence. She wasn't one to gossip, but the information helped her understand the house where she now worked. Mrs. Gable interrupted. "Beatrice, less chatter and more work," she reprimanded. "And you, Eleanor, after lunch go to the library. It's a mess in there, full of dust. The master asked for it to be organized, but I never had the time. Since you can read, you'll manage to arrange the books properly." The library was on the first floor, a wide room with dark wood shelves from floor to ceiling covering 3 walls. The 4th wall was occupied by large windows overlooking the gardens. There was a leather armchair by the window, a side table, a bronze lamp. The room smelled of old paper and waxed wood. Eleanor stopped in the doorway, intimidated by the quantity of books. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, bound in leather, with gold lettering on the spines. She started in the left corner, taking down book by book, wiping the dust with a damp cloth, putting them back. She read the titles with growing curiosity. There were classics of literature in English, French, Italian, works of philosophy, history, science, poetry by Whitman, Poe, Longfellow, novels by Dickens, Hawthorne, Melville. Eleanor had never seen so much literature in one place. The parson who had taught her to read had only half a dozen tattered books. Here was an entire universe of knowledge at her fingertips. She lost track of time. She organized the volumes by subject, then by author, creating order out of chaos. Sometimes she opened a book at random, read a paragraph or two, enchanted by the words. She was so absorbed she didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. She didn't notice the presence in the doorway until a deep male voice asked what she was doing there. Eleanor turned so fast she almost knocked over a stack of books. A tall man stood in the library entrance, observing her with an undecipherable expression. He wore traveling clothes, riding breeches, leather boots, a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. His face was angular with a strong jaw, straight nose, deep brown eyes. His dark hair was slightly tousled. There was tiredness in his features, but also the natural authority of one accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm sorry, sir," Eleanor managed to articulate. "Mrs. Gable told me to organize the library. I didn't mean to disturb. I'll finish quickly." The man took a step into the room. "You're new here," he stated more than asked. Eleanor nodded. "Arrived yesterday, sir. My name is Eleanor Vance." He examined her work with an attentive gaze. "You can read," he observed, noting how she had organized the books by categories. "Yes, sir," Eleanor confirmed, feeling heat rise up her neck. "I learned when I was younger." Julian, for it could only be the master, approached the shelves. He ran his fingers along the spines of the books with the familiarity of one who knew them well. "You put Whitman together with Poe," he said. "That's right. Poets of the same era, and you separated the American novels from the British ones. That is good." Eleanor didn't know how to respond. She just waited, standing with her hands clasped in front of her body. Julian picked up a volume, Wuthering Heights. "Have you read Bronte?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the book. "No, sir," admitted Eleanor. "I only read what the parson had. It was mostly the Bible and some books on the saints." He finally looked at her. For a moment their eyes met. Eleanor felt something strange in that look, as if he truly saw her, not just as a maid, but as a person. It was a fleeting sensation, soon replaced by his neutral expression returning. "Continue the work," Julian said. "It's looking good." And he left the library, leaving Eleanor alone with her heart beating faster than it should. She didn't understand why. Maybe it was the fright. Maybe the fear of having done something wrong. Or maybe it was something else, something she couldn't name and was afraid to explore. In the following days, Eleanor established a routine. She woke before dawn, helped in the kitchen, cleaned the designated rooms, organized whatever Mrs. Gable commanded. Little by little she learned the workings of that enormous house. There were 3 maids besides her and Beatrice. There was a cook, a laundress, a gardener, a groundskeeper, besides the countless workers in the cotton fields. Everything functioned with the precision of a clock. She saw little of Julian. He left early to inspect the plantation, returned for lunch, locked himself in his office with piles of papers, dined alone in the formal dining room. Sometimes he received the accountant, the overseer, cotton buyers, but he had no social life. He didn't receive visits from friends. He didn't go to parties. He lived for work, exactly as Beatrice had said. But sometimes Eleanor encountered him. She passed him in the hallway, and he greeted her with a nod. She served coffee when he had visitors, and he thanked her with a monosyllable. And twice a week, in the late afternoon, he went to the library. Eleanor would finish cleaning other rooms and invariably needed to fetch something there, and she would find him sitting in the armchair, reading, with the golden light of dusk entering through the windows. In the 3rd week, he spoke to her again. Eleanor entered the library to close the shutters as Mrs. Gable had instructed. Julian was reading, but raised his eyes when she entered. "You can leave them open," he asked. "I like the natural light." Eleanor obeyed. "Excuse me, sir," she said, turning to leave. "Eleanor," he called. She stopped. That was the first time he had said her name. "Did you finish organizing all the books?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Everything is arranged by subject and author." He nodded. "You did a good job," he praised. "If you wish, you may borrow books to read, as long as you take good care of them and return them to the right place." Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost knocked her over. "Really, sir?" she asked with a choked voice. "May I really?" Julian observed her with an expression that was almost curiosity. "Knowledge shouldn't be kept locked away," he said. "Books exist to be read. If you like to read, enjoy them." Eleanor thanked him 3 times, with a genuine smile that illuminated her tired face. "Thank you very much, Mr. Hawthorne. I will take very good care." That night, after everyone slept, Eleanor returned to the library with a candle. She stood for whole minutes just looking at the shelves, deciding. Finally, she chose a thin volume of poetry by Walt Whitman. She took it to her room, read by the dim light until her eyes burned with sleep. The words were beautiful, speaking of nature and the soul, feelings Eleanor thought she had buried along with Thomas. But there, on those pages, they pulsed alive again. She began taking a new book every week. She read in her spare time, before sleeping, on her Sundays off. She returned them with religious care, took another, and sometimes, when she entered the library and found Julian there, they exchanged a few words about what each was reading. They were brief, simple conversations, but charged with something neither of them named. "Eleanor is reading Austen now," he commented one afternoon. "What did you think?" Eleanor hesitated. It was strange, the wealthy master asking the opinion of a poor maid. But he seemed genuinely interested. "I liked it," she replied honestly. "Elizabeth is proud but smart, only sometimes I don't understand all the difficult words." Julian almost smiled. Almost. "That is normal," he said. "Austen used a refined vocabulary, but in time you get used to it. Keep reading. You will learn a lot." And she continued. She read voraciously, absorbing stories and ideas like dry earth absorbs water. She felt herself growing inside, expanding beyond the narrow limits that poverty had always imposed on her. The books showed worlds she would never visit, but could know through the pages. It was a strange freedom, that which came from printed words, but it was freedom nonetheless. It was on a hot afternoon in February, almost a month after Eleanor's arrival, that Mrs. Gable called all the maids for a meeting in the kitchen. "Girls," she announced with a serious voice, "next Saturday we will have an important dinner here. The master will receive the Montgomery family. They are neighboring planters, very fine people. I want everything spotless. Beatrice, you will help in the kitchen. Eleanor, you will serve the table, so prepare yourselves." Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness. She had never served a formal dinner. Beatrice noticed and whispered reassuringly, "It's easy. I'll teach you. You just need to be fast, discreet, and not drop anything." Eleanor nodded, but the anxiety remained. It wasn't just fear of making a fool of herself. It was a strange sensation that something was about to change, that dinner would bring consequences she couldn't yet foresee. And she was right, because when Saturday arrived and the Montgomery family walked through the door of Hawthorne Manor, Eleanor met Cecilia. And she understood immediately that life was about to get much more complicated. Saturday dawned with a clear sky and sun promising relentless heat. Eleanor woke even earlier than usual, nervous about the dinner taking place that night. Mrs. Gable was even more rigid than normal, inspecting every detail of the house with a hawk's eye. The silver was polished until it shone like a mirror, the crystal washed in vinegar water until it was transparent as a tear. The white linen tablecloth ironed 3 times to eliminate any unwanted crease. The flower arrangements were changed twice until the housekeeper approved. Eleanor spent the afternoon learning with Beatrice how to serve correctly. Always from the left when placing plates, from the right when clearing, explained the other maid patiently. Never speak unless asked something. Keep your eyes down, don't go looking at the guests. Fill the wine glasses when they are half full, but slowly so as not to splash. And for the love of God, don't trip. Eleanor repeated the movements dozens of times with empty plates, practicing until she felt minimal confidence. At 7 in the evening, when the sun began to descend, painting the sky in shades of amber, the Montgomerys' carriage arrived. Eleanor observed discreetly through the kitchen window while Julian descended the veranda steps to receive the guests. He wore formal attire, a dark suit, waistcoat, tie. His hair was slicked back with pomade. He looked different, more imposing, more distant. From the carriage first descended a corpulent man with a thick mustache and expensive clothes. "That is Colonel Montgomery," whispered Beatrice beside Eleanor, "owner of the Pineview Plantation, the biggest in the region after this one." Next descended an elegant woman in a navy blue silk dress and an ornamented hat. His wife, Mrs. Montgomery. And lastly, a young woman who made Eleanor hold her breath. Cecilia Montgomery had a beauty that seemed painted, porcelain skin without a blemish, wavy brown hair pinned in an elaborate style with mother-of-pearl combs, green eyes highlighted by long lashes. She wore a burgundy evening gown with delicate embroidery and a cinched waist. White gloves covered her arms to the elbows. A pearl necklace shone at her neck. She smiled at Julian with an intimacy Eleanor didn't expect, extended a gloved hand which he kissed politely. "Julian, what a pleasure to see you," Cecilia said with a melodious voice. "It's been so long since we met." Julian replied with polite cordiality that the house was honored by their presence. He led the guests inside. Eleanor and Beatrice ran back to the kitchen where the cook was finalizing the dinner preparations. Vegetable soup for the starter, roast beef with potatoes and vegetables, savory rice, fresh green salad, and for dessert, milk pudding with caramel sauce. When Mrs. Gable gave the signal, Eleanor carried the steaming tureen to the dining room. Her hands trembled slightly. She entered through the service door, kept her eyes down as instructed, began serving the lady of the house first. Mrs. Montgomery gave thanks without really looking at her. She served the colonel, who grumbled something about being hungry. When it was Cecilia's turn, the young woman raised her chin with an imperious gesture. "Less soup," she ordered. "I need to watch my figure." Eleanor served the smaller portion, moved to Julian, who thanked her with a discreet nod. She returned to the kitchen, waited the appropriate time, returned to clear the empty plates. Meanwhile, the conversation at the table flowed on subjects of local high society. They spoke of the cotton harvest, prices on the international market, politics in Atlanta. Cecilia participated little in these conversations, limiting herself to observing Julian with an attention Eleanor couldn't help but notice. During the main course, while Eleanor served the roast beef, Mrs. Montgomery commented that there would be a charity ball in Atlanta next month. "Julian, you must go," the lady insisted. "It's been years since you appeared at a social event. People already think you've turned into a hermit," Cecilia added with a delicate laugh, that he was missing the best parties in the region. Julian deflected, saying the plantation demanded much of his time. "But even you need diversion," argued Colonel Montgomery. "A man who only works gets sick, and you are still young, you can enjoy life." Eleanor cleared the plates, trying to become invisible, but every word penetrated her ears. Cecilia continued the subject with subtle persistence. "I am going to the ball," she said. "It would be much more pleasant if I had known company there." Her green eyes fixed on Julian with clear intention. He promised to consider it, but his tone was non-committal. During dessert, Eleanor made her first mistake. While serving the pudding to Cecilia, a little of the sauce dripped and fell onto the white tablecloth. It was a small stain, almost imperceptible, but Cecilia noticed immediately. "How careless!" she exclaimed with a sharp voice. "Look what you did. You soiled the cloth." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she murmured. "It was an accident. I'll clean it right now." "An accident," repeated Cecilia, with disdain. "Maids these days have no training. At our plantation this wouldn't happen." Mrs. Montgomery agreed with her daughter, saying it was hard to find competent help. Eleanor wanted to sink into the floor. Julian intervened with a firm voice. "It was merely an accident," he said. "It is of no importance." Cecilia looked at him surprised, then at Eleanor, with an expression that mixed anger and something darker. Eleanor finished serving and left the room with cheeks burning. In the kitchen, Beatrice consoled her, saying it could happen to anyone. But Eleanor felt humiliated, not by the stain, but by the tone of contempt in Cecilia's voice, as if she were less than nothing, as if her existence had no value. It was the same tone some mistresses used before, when Eleanor washed clothes to make a living. She thought she had gotten used to it, but it hurt nonetheless. Dinner ended, and the guests went to the parlour for coffee and liqueur. Eleanor and Beatrice cleared the table in silence. Through the door, left ajar, they heard the conversation. Cecilia had sat at the piano occupying the corner of the room. She played with evident skill, a soft and romantic melody. Her voice accompanied the piano in a French song. It was a performance calculated to impress, and it worked. Mrs. Montgomery praised her daughter effusively. The colonel said he had spent a fortune on European teachers, but it was worth every penny. Julian praised politely. Cecilia thanked him with false modesty, then asked if he still played. "Everyone said you had talent when we were younger," she commented. Julian replied that he had stopped years ago. "What a pity," said Cecilia with a soft voice. "I would love to hear you play again someday. Maybe we could do a duet." The suggestion carried an intimacy that crossed the boundaries of mere courtesy. When the Montgomerys finally left, it was past 11 o'clock. Julian walked them to the carriage. Cecilia lingered in the farewell, held his hand a second longer than necessary, promised they would see each other soon. The carriage disappeared into the dark night. Julian went back inside. Eleanor was finishing cleaning the dining room when he entered. "You can leave the rest for tomorrow," he said. "It's late." Eleanor turned, startled by his presence. "It's almost done, sir," she replied. "Just a few more minutes." Julian approached the window, stared out with hands in his pockets. "Dinner was satisfactory," he commented. "You did well, despite the small accident." Eleanor felt her face heat up again. "I apologize for that," she said. "It won't happen again." He turned to look at her. "No need to apologize," he stated. "Accidents happen. Miss Montgomery's reaction was exaggerated." Eleanor didn't know what to say. It was unusual for a master to defend a maid. She just nodded and returned to work. Julian remained there for a few more moments, as if he wanted to say something else. But finally, he wished her good night and left, leaving Eleanor alone with a confused heart. If you are enjoying this story, leave a like and share it with someone who also loves tales from the past. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes. Cecilia began visiting Hawthorne Manor with surprising frequency, always with some excuse, bringing an invitation to some event, fetching a recipe Mrs. Montgomery had borrowed, or simply stopping by for tea. Julian received the visits with courtesy, but Eleanor noticed he didn't encourage them. He answered questions politely but briefly. He didn't prolong conversations beyond necessary. He didn't return the veiled flirtations. But Cecilia didn't give up. On the contrary, she intensified her efforts. She appeared always impeccably dressed, in new clothes that must have cost a fortune. She brought discreet gifts, a book she thought he might like, a fine cigar her father had brought from a trip. She constantly reminded him of social events where he should appear. It was a meticulously planned campaign, a siege strategy by someone used to getting what she wanted. Eleanor served tea during these visits. She entered the room with a tray, placed it on the side table, withdrew silently. But Cecilia always found a way to humiliate her, asked for something not on the tray just to make her return to the kitchen, complained about the tea temperature, commented loudly that the maids of this house were not well trained. Julian never agreed, but also didn't contradict her openly, and that, in a way, hurt more than the humiliations. But there were other moments. Moments Eleanor guarded like secret treasures. Like that morning when she was in the garden cutting roses for an arrangement, and Julian passed by returning from his morning inspection. "Good morning, Eleanor," he greeted. "The roses are beautiful this year." Eleanor returned the greeting, commented that the gardener took very good care of them. Julian stopped, observed her work. "You have a way with arrangements," he said. "They always look harmonious." She thanked him with a shy smile. "I learned watching my mother when I was small," she told him. "She said flowers brightened any house, even the poorest ones." Julian nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother was wise," he said. "Beauty doesn't need money to exist." Eleanor looked at him, surprised by the statement. It was an uncommon thought for a wealthy man, but before she could respond, he had already gone on his way, leaving her with roses in her hands and a strange feeling in her chest. Or that afternoon when Eleanor was in the library returning a book she had finished. Julian entered without her noticing, absorbed as she was, looking at the shelves, deciding the next one. "What are you looking for?" he asked, making her jump. Eleanor turned quickly. "Sorry, sir," she said. "I came to return the book and get another." "Make yourself at home," he said. "Which one did you finish?" Eleanor showed the volume. "The Scarlet Letter." He raised his eyebrows. "And what did you think?" Eleanor hesitated, didn't know if she should give a sincere opinion, but something in his look encouraged her. "I thought it was sad," she admitted. "Hester is punished by a society that is cruel, while the man who sinned with her keeps his reputation just because he is a minister." Julian almost smiled. "You caught exactly what Hawthorne wanted to show," he said. "How society can be hypocritical when it judges the sins of others," Eleanor ventured. "Do you agree with that, sir?" He became serious. "I do," he replied. "We waste too much time with judgment and conventions. Sometimes when we realize it, it's too late." There was weight in those words, as if he spoke from his own experience. Eleanor wanted to ask more, but didn't dare. Julian broke the moment by taking another book from the shelf. "Read this one now," he suggested, handing her the volume. "Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I think you'll like it. It's about a strong woman who challenges society." Eleanor accepted the book with reverence. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne." Their hands brushed briefly in the exchange. It was a fleeting touch, accidental, but both felt it. Eleanor pulled her hand back quickly, cheeks flushing. Julian cleared his throat, took a step back. "Tell me later what you thought," he said, and left, hurriedly. Eleanor stood there, holding the book against her chest, heart racing, tried to convince herself she was just nervous or grateful for the kindness. But deep down, she knew it was something else. Something dangerous was growing inside her. Something that shouldn't exist. She was a maid. He was a wealthy master. There was an unbridgeable chasm between them. Besides, she had loved Thomas. She still wore the thin wedding band he had given her. She had no right to feel what she was feeling for another man, especially one who could never reciprocate. But the heart does not obey reason. The more Eleanor tried to stifle her feelings, the more they grew. Every kind word from Julian fed the flame. Every gaze held a second longer than necessary, made her pulse accelerate. Every time he defended her discreetly from Cecilia's barbs, she felt gratitude mixed with something much more intense. And Eleanor began to notice that perhaps she wasn't alone in this. There were small signs, almost imperceptible, but present. How Julian seemed to look for excuses to pass by the library when she was there. How he asked Mrs. Gable about Eleanor's work with unusual frequency. How his eyes followed her when she crossed the hallway. How he became less closed off, less somber since she arrived. Mrs. Gable also noticed. The housekeeper observed everything with experienced eyes. One day, she called Eleanor for a private chat in the pantry. "Girl," she said with a low but firm voice, "I need to warn you about something. You are a good worker, I have no complaints. But be careful." Eleanor pretended not to understand. "Careful with what, Mrs. Gable?" The housekeeper sighed. "With your feelings," she replied, "and with his too. I see things. I'm not blind. You two are playing with fire." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," she tried to deny. Mrs. Gable shook her head. "Don't lie to me," she said. "I was young once too. I know how to recognize when two people are becoming interested in each other, even when they try to hide it. And I'm warning you because I like you. This can only end badly. Especially for you. He is the master. You are the help. Society doesn't forgive these things. And there's Cecilia, with her eye on him too. That girl won't let it pass." Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes. "I didn't choose to feel anything," she whispered. "I didn't want to. I know it's impossible." Mrs. Gable touched her shoulder with unexpected gentleness. "I know, child," she said with a softer voice. "The heart doesn't ask permission, but you need to decide if it's worth the risk. Because if this becomes a scandal, the one who will suffer isn't him. It's you. He has a name, money, position. You have none of that. Think well." The housekeeper's words haunted Eleanor for the following days. She knew Mrs. Gable was right. She knew she was walking toward a precipice, but even knowing she couldn't pull away, it was as if forces beyond her control pulled her toward Julian. And the worst part is she felt he was pulled the same way. The situation reached a turning point on an afternoon in March. Cecilia was visiting the estate, as was now routine. This time she brought her mother along. The two were received in the parlor. Eleanor served tea and biscuits according to protocol. Mrs. Montgomery chatted animatedly about the charity ball that would finally happen the following week. "Julian, you promised you'd consider it," she reminded him. "Have you decided?" Julian replied. He still wasn't sure if he could go. Cecilia leaned forward, her hand resting delicately on his arm. "Please try to go," she asked with a sweet voice. "It would be so special to have you there. It's been so long since we danced together. Do you remember that midsummer ball when we were 15 and 17? It was my first waltz." Eleanor, who was collecting the empty cups, felt a sharp pang in her chest. There was intimacy in the way Cecilia touched Julian, in the way she evoked shared memories. They had a history. They belonged to the same world. Julian withdrew his arm discreetly. "I remember," he said without enthusiasm. Mrs. Montgomery took the opportunity to press further. "People are commenting that you two would make a perfect couple," she revealed. "Two traditional families, neighboring plantations. You've known each other since childhood. It makes perfect sense." Cecilia blushed elegantly, but didn't deny it. Just looked at Julian with expectation. He looked visibly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said with forced politeness, "I prefer not to feed gossip." "But it isn't gossip," insisted the lady. "It is merely a natural observation. You have been a widower long enough. Life goes on. You need to think about rebuilding your family." Eleanor felt as if every word was a blade cutting her skin. She finished collecting the cups and left quickly, before anyone noticed the tears threatening to spill over. She went to the kitchen, set down the tray with more force than necessary. Beatrice looked startled. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing," replied Eleanor. Just tired. I need air. She went out the back door to the garden hidden behind the house where the employees didn't usually go. She sat on the stone bench under the shade of a weeping willow. She let the tears fall finally. She was a fool, such a fool. How could she imagine, even for a second, that there was a possibility? Julian was a wealthy widower who needed to rebuild his life with someone of his own class. Cecilia was the obvious choice, perfect in every social aspect, beautiful, educated, rich, from the same world. What did Eleanor have to offer? She was a poor widow, without family, without dowry, without position. She was a maid, just that. And maids don't fall in love with masters. Or they do, but they pay dearly for it. She didn't know how long she stayed there, crying silently. It was the sound of footsteps on the grass that made her lift her head. Julian was there, a few yards away, looking at her with an intense expression she had never seen. Eleanor stood up quickly, wiped her tears with the backs of her hands. "Sorry, sir," she said with a choked voice. "I shouldn't be here. I'll go back to work now." He took a step forward. "Why are you crying?" he asked. Eleanor shook her head. "It's nothing," she lied. "Just foolishness." Julian came closer. "Doesn't look like foolishness," he said. "Was it Mrs. Montgomery's words about me and Cecilia?" Eleanor stood motionless. "How did he know?" "I noticed how you left the room," he explained. "And I came to find you. Eleanor, look at me." She obeyed against her will, raised her eyes to meet his. What she saw there left her breathless. There was intensity, conflict, and something that looked dangerously like desire. "There will be no marriage to Cecilia," Julian said with a low voice. "No matter what her mother says, no matter what society expects." Eleanor felt her heart race. "Why not?" she whispered. "She is perfect for you." Julian took another step. Now they were so close, Eleanor could feel the heat radiating from him. "Perfect, according to whom?" he questioned. "According to social conventions. But I do not love her, never loved her, and I will not marry without love again. I did that once. My first marriage was arranged by the families. I was too young, too foolish to contest it. We respected each other, but there was no passion. When she died, I felt guilt, sadness, but not the kind of devastating pain I should have felt. And that made me realize I wasted a chance to have something real." Eleanor could barely breathe. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. He held her arm gently. "Because you need to understand," he said. "I have changed since you arrived here. 3 months ago, I was dead inside. Just existing, working, breathing mechanically, but you brought life back. The way you read with passion, how you treat the flowers with care, how you talk about books with shining eyes, how you smile when you think no one is watching. Eleanor, you made me remember that I am still capable of feeling." The tears returned, but now they were different. "We can't," whispered Eleanor. "You know we can't. I am a maid. You are a wealthy planter. It would never work. People would destroy us. Your reputation, your business, everything." Julian caressed her face with his thumb, wiping away a tear. "I don't care what people will say," he stated. "I'm tired of living for the expectations of others. I want to live for what I feel, for what is real and true." But Eleanor took a step back, moving away from his touch. "I cannot do this to you," she said. "I cannot be the reason you lose everything you built. And besides," she hesitated, "I still wear Thomas's ring. I loved him. I don't know if I can love again. I don't know if what I am feeling is real, or if it is just gratitude for everything you did for me." Julian lowered his hand. "I understand," he said with a controlled voice. "And I won't force anything. I won't put you in an impossible position. But I want you to know one thing. What I feel for you is real, and I will wait as long as necessary for you to decide what you feel. If it is gratitude, I will accept it and keep my distance. But if it is something more, if you feel even a little of what I feel, then we will find a way to make it work. I don't care how many barriers exist. We will cross them." Before Eleanor could respond, Mrs. Gable's voice called from the other side of the garden. "Eleanor, where are you? There is work waiting." The spell broke. Julian retreated. "Best you go," he said. "But think about what I said." Eleanor nodded, incapable of speaking. She ran back to the house with her heart in turmoil. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She tossed in bed, reliving the conversation in the garden. Julian's words echoed endlessly. He had feelings for her, real feelings, and she could no longer deny that she reciprocated. But what did that mean? How could they be together without causing a devastating scandal? And was she ready to risk everything? She thought of Thomas, of the simple but happy life they had together. He was a good man, hard-working, honest, but Eleanor knew deep in her heart that what she felt for Julian was different, more intense, deeper. With Thomas there was affection, companionship. With Julian there was passion, a connection of souls, a sensation of being seen and understood in a way she had never experienced. Would it be betrayal to admit that? Would it be disrespect to Thomas's memory to allow herself to love again? Eleanor cried softly in the dark, confused, frightened, but also strangely hopeful. For the first time in months, she felt truly alive, not just surviving, but really alive. The following days were of silent tension. Julian and Eleanor avoided being alone. When they met in the presence of others, they kept a respectful distance, conversations strictly professional. But their glances were charged with unspoken meaning, and everyone around began to notice. Beatrice commented to Eleanor that the master seemed different lately, more present, less closed off. "He even smiles sometimes," she said, marveling. "Haven't seen that in years." The accountant commented to Julian that he was lighter, less overburdened. "You look sharper," joked the man. "Must be spring coming." But the one who really noticed was Cecilia. On her next visit, she observed Julian with calculating eyes, saw how he looked discreetly out the window, searching for someone, saw how he asked casually if the new maid was adapting well, saw how his eyes followed Eleanor when she crossed the garden carrying a basket of clean clothes, and jealousy lit up like fire in dry brush. Cecilia was an intelligent woman. She knew she couldn't confront Julian directly. That would push him away, so she chose another target. On an afternoon when she visited with the excuse of bringing an invitation for a charity tea, she asked for a glass of cold water. Eleanor went to fetch it. When she returned, Cecilia was alone in the parlour. Julian had been called by the overseer to resolve an urgency. Cecilia accepted the glass, drank delicately, then fixed her green eyes on Eleanor with cutting coldness. "What is your name again?" she asked, though she knew perfectly well. "Eleanor, ma'am," she replied. Cecilia nodded. "Eleanor," she repeated. "Tell me something, Eleanor. Do you think you are special because you can read a few books?" Eleanor was disconcerted. "I don't understand, ma'am." Cecilia smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "I see how you look at Julian," she said with a low and venomous voice, "and I see how he looks at you too. But let me explain something to you. Rich men sometimes amuse themselves with the help. It is a common pastime, but never, never do they marry them. Do you understand?" Eleanor felt as if she had been slapped. "I don't know what you are talking about, ma'am," she managed to say. Cecilia stood up, approached until she was very close, invading Eleanor's space. "You're playing dumb now," she said. "But I warned you. If you think you're going to get anything other than being used and discarded, you are very mistaken. Julian will marry me. It is his destiny, the logical choice. You are just a temporary distraction. And when he gets tired, you will be sent away without references, without anything. So if you are smart, keep your place and don't feed ridiculous illusions." Before Eleanor could respond, Julian entered the room. Cecilia changed completely, returning to being the delicate and polite lady. "Julian, dear," she said with a sweet voice, "I was just chatting with your maid. She is very helpful." Julian looked from one to the other, sensing the tension in the air. Eleanor was pale, Cecilia very composed. "Did something happen?" he asked. "Nothing," replied Cecilia, grabbing her purse, "but I must go. My mother awaits me. See you soon." And she left, leaving expensive perfume and a veiled threat in the air. Julian turned to Eleanor. "What did she say to you?" he wanted to know. Eleanor shook her head. "Nothing important," she lied. "Excuse me, I need to get back to work." She left quickly before he could insist. But Julian wasn't a fool. He knew something had happened, and that only reinforced his determination to face the situation regardless of the consequences. Because Julian Hawthorne was tired of living by rules of a society that valued appearances more than true feelings. He was tired of being a prisoner of expectations, and for the first time in years he had found a reason to fight, to risk, to live for real, and that reason had a name: Eleanor. But Eleanor, on her side, was terrified. Cecilia's words echoed endlessly. What if she was right? What if Julian saw her only as a temporary distraction? What if in the end she lost everything, the job, her reputation, her heart, and ended up alone again? Would she be able to survive that? The storm was brewing, and no one walked away unscathed when storms of that size broke. The week that followed was one of the most difficult in Eleanor's life. Cecilia intensified the visits, always with some elaborate excuse. And every time she came, she found subtle ways to humiliate Eleanor in front of Julian, asked for impossible things, complained about impeccable service, made comments about the inadequacy of the servants. Julian noticed and always defended Eleanor discreetly, which only worsened the situation because it fed Cecilia's anger. Mrs. Gable observed everything with growing concern, called Eleanor again for a private chat. "The situation is getting dangerous," she warned. "Cecilia is realizing she has competition, and that is bad. A woman with jealousy and money is capable of anything." Eleanor knew the housekeeper was right. But what could she do? Quit and leave? The idea tore her heart in half. Stay and face the consequences seemed like social suicide. It was on a rainy afternoon in April that everything changed. Eleanor was in the library organizing books that had recently arrived from Atlanta. Julian had bought a new collection, and she had offered to catalogue it. The rain drummed on the windows, creating an atmosphere of intimacy. Eleanor was so absorbed in the work she didn't notice when Julian entered. He stood in the doorway for a few moments, just watching. Eleanor had pinned her hair in a loose bun from which rebellious strands escaped. She wore the simple maid's uniform, but there was natural grace in her movements as she reached the high shelves, as she leafed through the books with reverent care. Julian felt his chest tighten. It wasn't just physical attraction, though that existed. It was something deeper, more complete. It was the way she delighted in simple things, how she treated everything with care and respect, how her eyes shone when she discovered new authors. It was the person she was, not just the appearance. Eleanor finally noticed his presence and turned, startled. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, "I didn't hear you arrive. Sorry, I was concentrating." He entered the room, closing the door behind him. Eleanor felt her heart accelerate. "No need to apologize," he said. "I like seeing you so dedicated. How is the work going?" Eleanor showed the notebook where she noted titles and authors. "I've catalogued half," she explained. "The new books are wonderful. There are some I've never heard of." Julian approached to see the notebook. He stood so close Eleanor could smell his scent, a mixture of soap and fine tobacco. "You have beautiful handwriting," he commented, "and organized by author alphabetically. Very efficient." Eleanor tried to maintain composure, but her hands trembled slightly. "Thank you," she murmured. Julian didn't move away. He remained there too close, looking at her with an intensity that made the air heavy. "Eleanor," he said with a low voice, "I need to know. Did you think about what we discussed in the garden? About what I feel? About what you feel?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "I thought about it," she admitted. "I can't stop thinking about it." "And what is your answer?" he insisted. "Do you feel something for me? Or is it just gratitude, as you said?" Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there were tears there, but also determination. "I feel it," she confessed. "I feel much more than I should, and that terrifies me, because I know it can't work. Society will destroy us. Miss Cecilia already warned me that I am just a temporary distraction, and part of me believes her, because it makes sense. Men of your position don't stay with women like me." Julian held her face with both hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. "Listen to what I am going to tell you," he spoke with a firm voice. "You are not a distraction, not a pastime, not anything temporary. You are the woman who made me come back to life, the woman who makes me want to wake up in the morning, the woman who shows me that there is still beauty and kindness in the world, and I am not going to let you go because of stupid conventions." Eleanor's tears fell, wetting his hands. "But your name, your reputation, business, everything will suffer," she argued. "What do I care?" questioned Julian. "What good is having all that if I don't have anyone to share it with? If I live alone in this huge house without warmth, without joy, without love, I prefer to have you and face the whole world than have society's approval and remain dead inside." Eleanor sobbed. She had no more strength to fight against what she felt. "I want to be with you too," she confessed. "But I am so afraid of hurting you, afraid of not being enough for your world, afraid of losing you after allowing myself to love you." Julian leaned in until their foreheads touched. "You are more than enough," he whispered. "You are everything I need, and you won't lose me, I promise." And then, there in the silent library with the rain singing on the windows, Julian kissed Eleanor. It was a soft kiss, almost reverent, as if she were something precious and fragile. Eleanor melted into that touch, all barriers crumbling. She returned the kiss with all the repressed emotion. It was like coming home after a long journey. It was like finally breathing after being submerged. It felt right in a way Eleanor had never experienced, not even with Thomas. When they separated, both were breathless and with shining eyes. Julian smiled, a true smile that illuminated his whole face, making him look years younger. Eleanor smiled back, shy but happy. "And now?" she asked. "What do we do?" Julian caressed her face. "Now," he said, "we go slowly. I won't expose you to a scandal overnight, but I also won't hide what I feel forever. We will find the right moment." In the following days, there was a palpable change in the air. Julian was different, lighter, more present, smiled more, talked to the employees, even hummed sometimes while working in the office. Eleanor also radiated a new happiness. Worked with even more dedication. But now there was lightness in her steps, and when their glances met in the hallways, they exchanged discreet smiles that spoke volumes. Mrs. Gable noticed everything, but had decided not to interfere anymore. Talked to Beatrice one afternoon. "I think we're going to have changes in this house," she commented. "What kind of changes?" wanted to know the other maid. "The kind that makes society talk," replied the housekeeper. "But you know what? I've worked here for 20 years. Saw the master grow up, marry for obligation, become a widower and die inside. Now I finally see him alive again, and it is because of Eleanor. So let them say what they want. I prefer a happy master to a respectable but dead house. But the universe has a way of testing the strength of feelings before allowing them to thrive, and the test came in the form of the charity ball in Atlanta. Julian finally decided to go, not for the reasons Cecilia imagined, but because he needed to start social reintegration that would allow, eventually, introducing Eleanor to the world properly. He had a plan. It would take time, require strategy, but he was determined to do it. On the night of the ball, Eleanor helped prepare Julian's clothes. She was ironing the linen suit with care when he entered her room. Eleanor was startled. "Sir, you shouldn't be here," she said, looking nervously at the hallway. "If someone sees—" Julian closed the door. "It's 8 o'clock," he said. "Everyone is busy with their own chores. No one will see." He approached her. "I want you to know I am not going to the ball because I want to. I go because it is necessary." Eleanor nodded. "I know," she said. "No need to explain." He held her hands. "Cecilia will be there," he continued. "And she will try everything to trap me in some public commitment, but I won't yield." Eleanor forced a smile. "She is beautiful," she said, "and from your world. It would be so much easier if you chose her." Julian pulled Eleanor close. "I don't want easy," he stated. "I want true. I want you." And kissed her again, a more urgent kiss this time, charged with promise and desire. Julian went to the ball that night. Eleanor stayed at the estate, trying not to think about what was happening there, tried not to imagine Cecilia dancing with him, laughing, flirting, using all the resources she had, tried to trust his words, but jealousy and insecurity gnawed inside. The ball took place at the most exclusive club in Atlanta. The hall was decorated with flowers and gas lamps that created a romantic atmosphere. The region's elite was present, with their expensive clothes and glittering jewelry. Julian arrived alone, but was immediately surrounded by acquaintances. Everyone commented that it had been years since they saw him at a social event. Some speculated that he was finally getting over his grief. Cecilia arrived with her parents. She was stunning in an emerald green silk dress that matched her eyes, hair held in an elaborate style with interwoven pearls. When she saw Julian, her face lit up. She went straight to him. "Julian," she said with a voice overflowing with joy. "You really came. I'm so happy," Julian greeted politely. "I promised I would consider it," he said, "and I decided to appear." The orchestra began to play, and Cecilia wasted no time. "Dance with me?" she asked. "The first waltz of the night?" Julian couldn't refuse without being rude, offered his arm and led her to the floor. They danced well together, she had to admit. Years of dance lessons for both guaranteed harmony in movements. Cecilia took advantage of the proximity. "I am so glad you came," she said softly. "I missed you." Julian maintained a neutral expression. "You see me at the plantation almost every week," he reminded her. "It's not the same thing," insisted Cecilia. "There you are, always busy, distant. Here we can really talk. Julian, we need to speak about us." "There is no us," he replied with gentleness but firmness. "We are childhood friends, neighbors, nothing beyond that." Cecilia looked wounded. "Why can't there be more?" she questioned. "Our families expect it. Society expects it. It would be perfect." Julian sighed. "Perfect according to whom, Cecilia? According to others' expectations? I already lived like that once. I won't repeat the mistake." The music ended, and Julian thanked her, tried to move away, but Colonel Montgomery intercepted him. "Julian, my boy," he said with a strong voice, putting a heavy hand on his shoulder, "we need to talk business. Come with me." Practically dragged Julian to the terrace, where a group of planters discussed cotton prices and the political situation. Julian was trapped there for almost an hour, participating in conversations that didn't interest him. When he finally managed to free himself, he looked for a quiet place, went to the club's garden where there were fewer people, breathed deep the night air, all that seemed so empty, The superficial conversations, the fake smiles, the social strategies. He preferred to be at the plantation, in the silent library, with Eleanor reading by his side. That was real. That was when he heard the voice of Dr. Arthur Sterling behind him. Fleeing the party, Julian. The doctor was one of the few true friends Julian had. Approached with 2 glasses of whiskey, offered one, Julian accepted gratefully. "You know me well," he said. "I'm not one for parties." Arthur laughed. "Then why did you come?" Julian took a sip. "Question of social necessity," he replied vaguely. Arthur observed his friend with clinical attention. "There is something different about you," he commented. "You are less somber, less stuck in the past. Did something happen?" Julian hesitated. Could he trust Arthur? The doctor had always been a man of open mind, progressive, had true friendship, not just social convenience. Julian decided to risk it. "I found someone," he admitted softly. "Someone who made me remember it's worth living." Arthur smiled genuinely. "That is wonderful," he said. "And who is the lucky lady? Do I know her?" Julian became tense. "It's complicated," he replied. "Very complicated." The doctor frowned. "Complicated how? Is she married?" Julian shook his head. "Worse," he said. "She is my maid." The silence that followed was heavy. Arthur processed the information. Finally, nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "And are you serious? Is it not just a passing attraction?" Julian looked at his friend with intensity. "It is the most serious thing I have felt in my life," he stated. "She is intelligent, kind, hard-working, understands me in a way no one ever understood, and I love her. Yes, I love her." Arthur whistled softly. "You know what you're getting into, right? Society will crucify you. They'll say it's a scandal, that you lost your mind. Business could suffer." Julian nodded. "I know all that," he said. "And I don't care. I'm tired of living by absurd rules. I want to live by my heart." Arthur put a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Then you have my support," he declared. "I think it is the bravest and wisest decision you have ever taken. Life is too short to waste on empty conventions. If you love her and she makes you happy, marry her. Face society. True friends will stand by your side. The others don't matter." Julian felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Arthur," he said. I needed to hear that, but the conversation was interrupted by Cecilia's arrival. "I looked for you everywhere," she said with slight reproach in her voice. "Everyone is commenting that you disappeared. Come, there are people who want to greet you." Julian had no choice but to return to the hall, pass the rest of the night being cordial but distant, refusing politely all of Cecilia's advances. When he finally could leave, it was past midnight. He returned to the plantation with a feeling of immense relief, found Eleanor still awake in the kitchen, preparing dough for the next day's bread. She was startled when he entered. "Sir," she said, "I thought you'd sleep late. How was the ball?" Julian approached her. "It was exactly as expected," he replied. "Boring, superficial, fake. I only wanted to be here. With you." Eleanor blushed. "Even with all those beautiful women there?" Julian smiled. "Especially because there were beautiful women there," he said. "Because none of them is you. None makes me feel what you make me feel." Eleanor let go of the dough, wiped her hands on her apron. "Cecilia must have been disappointed," she commented. Julian sighed. "She will have to get used to disappointment," he said, "because I made my decision, and I talked to my friend Arthur. He supported me completely, said I should follow my heart." Eleanor felt hope light up. "But there was still fear. And when the rest of society finds out," she asked. "We will face it together," promised Julian. "But we need to do it the right way. I don't want to expose you to humiliations, so let's take it slow. Let's prepare the ground. And when the time is right, we will announce our relationship and face whatever comes." If you are loving this story, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe, and share with more people. But fate had other plans. Because the next morning, Cecilia appeared at the plantation earlier than usual. She came furious. Julian was still having coffee when she entered unannounced. Eleanor was serving when Cecilia burst into the room. "We need to talk," announced Cecilia, with a voice too loud. "Now." Julian stood up. "Cecilia, that is bad manners," he reprimanded. "You cannot enter my house like this." "Bad manners is you giving me false hope," she shouted. "Yesterday at the ball you barely spoke to me. Avoided me all night, and then I heard you spent a long time talking in the garden with Arthur. About what? About whom?" Julian kept his voice calm. "I do not owe you explanations about my private conversations," he said. Cecilia laughed humorlessly. "Of course you do," she argued, "because everyone knows we are going to marry. It is expected. It is right. It is what should happen." Julian felt his patience run out. "We are not going to marry, Cecilia," he said with a firm voice. "We never will. I do not love you, never loved, and I will not marry without love again. Sorry if you had different expectations, but I never fed them." Cecilia went pale. "But everyone expects it," she whispered. "Our families, society. What will they say about me?" Julian softened his voice. "You are a beautiful woman, educated, of good family," he said. "You will find someone who loves you truly. But that someone is not me." It was then that Cecilia saw Eleanor standing in the corner of the room, a silent witness to the scene, and something clicked in her mind. All the puzzle pieces, Julian's different behavior, her frequent visits that never resulted in anything, the way he always defended that maid, the looks she had caught between them. "It's her," said Cecilia with a strangled voice. "It's because of her that you reject me." Julian tensed. "Do not make this about her," he warned. Cecilia approached Eleanor with eyes flashing with rage. "You!" she hissed. "You think you're smart? Think you can steal what is mine?" Eleanor backed away. "I didn't steal anything, Mum," she said with a firm voice despite the fear. "Nothing here belonged to you." Cecilia raised her hand as if to slap Eleanor, but Julian grabbed her arm before the blow connected. "Enough!" he roared. "You will not lay a finger on her." Cecilia turned to him with an expression of shock and betrayal. "So it is true," she whispered. "You are with her, with a maid. Julian, have you lost your mind? Your reputation will be destroyed. Business will suffer. Everyone will turn their back on you." Julian released her arm. "Let them turn," he said. "I prefer to have her and lose everything else than have everything and lose her." Cecilia staggered as if she had taken a punch, looked at Eleanor with pure hate. "You will pay for this," she threatened. "I will tell everyone. I will spread that you are a gold digger who seduced the master. I will destroy you." Eleanor raised her chin with a dignity that surprised even herself. "Do what you feel necessary," she said. "But know that I love him, and he loves me, and that is the only thing that matters." Cecilia left like a hurricane, slamming the door hard. Julian turned to Eleanor, who was trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I didn't want it to be like this." Eleanor shook her head. "It was inevitable," she replied. "Better now than later." He pulled her into a hug. "It's going to get difficult," he warned. "She will carry out the threat. She will spread it to everyone." Eleanor rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I know," she murmured, "but I don't care, because I have you." And Cecilia really carried out the threat. In the following 48 hours, the news spread through the region like wildfire. The millionaire planter Julian Hawthorne was involved with a maid. The scandal was discussed in every home, in every parlor, in every church. Opinions varied between shocked and indignant. Some said Julian had gone mad with grief. Others that the girl obviously was an opportunistic gold digger. Few defended his right to choose whom to love. The first practical effects were felt quickly. 3 cotton buyers cancelled contracts claiming they didn't want to associate with scandal. 2 old workers quit not agreeing with the situation. The parson of the local parish sent a message saying Julian was no longer welcome at services while he persisted in sin. Mrs. Montgomery wrote a furious letter cutting relations between the families. Julian faced it all with iron determination. He secured new cotton buyers, hired new workers, stopped attending the hypocritical church. But Eleanor suffered, seeing the damage her presence caused. "Maybe it is better I leave," she suggested one night when they were alone in the office. "Julian is losing a lot because of me." He held her face. "Look at me," he ordered gently. "I'm not losing anything that truly matters. These prejudiced buyers? Don't need them. These intolerant workers don't want them here. This fake society never cared for it. The only thing that matters is you, and if you leave, then yes, I lose everything." But there was support too. Dr. Sterling visited them openly, making it clear he supported the couple. Some younger and progressive workers manifested solidarity. And surprisingly, Mrs. Gable gathered all the maids and house staff and declared that whoever couldn't respect the new situation should resign immediately. "Because this house will have changes," she announced, "and whoever doesn't accept is free to go. But I stay, and I support my master." It was a defining moment. No one resigned. Beatrice hugged Eleanor with tears in her eyes. "I always knew you two were made for each other," she said. "Just took a while for you to notice." Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude for her friend and the housekeeper, who could have made everything harder, but chose to do the opposite. 2 weeks after the scandal exploded, Julian made a definitive decision. He called Eleanor to the office. "Sit down," he asked. "I have something to ask you." Eleanor sat nervously. He looked serious, almost solemn. "What is it?" she asked. Julian knelt before her, taking a velvet box from his pocket. "Eleanor," he said with an emotional voice, "I know our story wasn't conventional. I know the world is against us. I know it will still be hard, but I also know I love you more than I loved anyone in my life. You brought me back to life, gave me a reason to wake every day, showed me that there is still kindness and beauty in the world. And I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me? Please." Eleanor wept copiously, couldn't speak, just nodded repeatedly. Julian opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a small diamond. He took the simple band Eleanor still wore, the one Thomas had given her, and placed it on the small table with respect, then slid the new ring on her finger. Eleanor looked at the old ring and felt peace. Thomas would be happy for her. He always wanted her to be happy, and now she was. Julian stood up, pulled her to stand too, and kissed her with all the contained emotion. When they separated, both were laughing and crying at the same time. "We will face everything together," he promised. "Side by side." Eleanor nodded. "Together," she agreed, "always." The wedding was simple, held at the courthouse 2 weeks later. Dr. Sterling was a witness, along with Mrs. Gable. There was no big party, just an intimate dinner at the plantation with the staff, who had become family. Eleanor wore a simple but beautiful white dress that Mrs. Gable helped her sew. Julian wore his best suit. They exchanged vows with tears in their eyes and smiles on their lips. The following months were not easy. Society continued giving the cold shoulder. Many doors closed, but others opened. Younger and more progressive planters began doing business with Julian, admiring his courage. New friendships were formed, based on real values, not appearances. And slowly, very slowly, even some of the staunchest critics began to soften, seeing that the marriage was solid and genuine. Eleanor proved to be much more than a wife. She became a true partner in the management of the plantation. Her skill with numbers and her education, though basic, were improved. Julian hired a private tutor for her. Eleanor learned voraciously not just academic subjects, but also everything about rural administration. Soon she was helping with the accounts, organizing the workers in negotiations. She gained gradual respect from the employees and even some suppliers for her competence and dedication, and Julian blossomed beside her. The somber and closed man disappeared completely, replaced by someone lighter, happier, more generous. He laughed frequently, showed affection openly, treated workers with more humanity, improved conditions in the cabins, raised wages. Hawthorne Manor became a model of social justice and simultaneous prosperity. 3 years after the wedding, on a golden autumn sunset, Eleanor and Julian were sitting on the veranda, watching the sun paint the cotton fields in amber tones. Eleanor leaned on his shoulder, fingers intertwined. The wedding ring shone on her finger, next to the engagement ring. "Do you regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Everything you had to face because of me?" Julian turned to look at her, kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness. "Not for a second," he replied. "You are the best thing that happened to me. Before you, I just existed. Now I truly live. And I prefer a true life with you and all the obstacles that came along than a comfortable but empty life without you." Eleanor smiled, eyes misty. "I love you," she whispered, "more than words can express." "I love you too," he replied, "forever." And there, in that moment of absolute peace, while the sun went down on the horizon and the plantation breathed tranquility, Eleanor thought of everything she had passed through. The poverty, widowhood, the despair that brought her to that estate, the humiliation, the fear, the barriers that seemed insurmountable. But she also thought of the love she found, the courage she discovered within herself, the dignity she never abandoned, even in the hardest moments. And she understood that every journey, however painful, is worth it when it leads to the right place. And she was exactly where she should be, beside the man she loved, building a life together, proving to the world that true love overcomes any barrier. 5 years after that sunset, Hawthorne Manor was the most prosperous and respected in the region. Eleanor and Julian were known not just as the unusual couple who defied conventions, but as fair and visionary administrators. They implemented a school for the workers' children, improved the cabin homes, created a relief fund for families in difficulty. The estate became an example of how financial success and social responsibility could walk together. Eleanor was in the library, now also her office, reviewing the month's accounts when Julian entered. She raised her eyes and smiled, that smile that still made his heart race even after 8 years together. "Finished?" he asked. "Almost," she replied. "Just a few more pages." He approached, looked over her shoulder. "You are brilliant," he commented with genuine admiration. "Much better with numbers than I am." Eleanor laughed. "Had a good teacher," she said, "and good motivation." Julian kissed the top of her head. "Come," he said, "let's walk in the gardens before it gets dark." Eleanor closed the ledger, stood up. They walked hand in hand to the garden that was now even more beautiful, with new flowers Eleanor had planted, with stone benches Julian had ordered made. They sat under the weeping willow, the same one where Eleanor cried years ago when she thought everything was impossible. "You know what I'm thinking," said Eleanor. "What?" asked Julian. "I'm thinking that if someone told me 8 years ago I would be here, married to you, happy like this, I wouldn't believe it. It would have seemed an impossible fairy tale." Julian squeezed her hand. "But fairy tales exist," he said. "Only in real life they come with obstacles and challenges. The happy ending needs to be earned." Eleanor agreed. "And we earned it," she stated. "Together." And they really did, because their love wasn't perfect, wasn't easy, wasn't without challenges. But it was real. It was profound. It was living proof that when two souls recognize each other, no social barrier, no prejudice, no convention is strong enough to keep them apart. They faced the world and won, and wrote their own story, a story of courage, dignity, and true love that crossed all barriers. And they lived, not the happily ever after of simple fairy tales, but the real happily ever after that made of daily choices, companionship, mutual respect, love that renews every morning. They lived building a legacy that went far beyond themselves, transforming the lives of people around, proving that one person can make a difference when guided by heart and courage. This was the story of Eleanor and Julian, the simple maid who conquered the heart of the millionaire planter. But more than that, it was the story of two hearts that met at the right moment, that had the courage to fight for what they felt, and proved that true love is the most powerful force that exists, a force capable of transforming not just two lives, but the whole world around them.